I mean really afraid. I mean, I thought about the times I've been afraid. I thought about the times when I had to tell my parents that I got in trouble at school. Now I know you think I'm perfect, but let me disabuse you of that notion. I got in trouble when I was a kid. Quite often, as a matter of fact. Nobody ever told my daddy, Mr. Reynolds, you keep hitting that boy with that belt, you're going to ruin him. Nobody ever told my daddy that. I thought about the times when the bullies chased me when I was you understand, you think you have racial problems here. Try being a Howley kid with a bunch of Hawaiians. You have no idea what that's like. You do. And I had to run home and keep from getting beat up after school. And thought about that. And I thought about the times when I preached my first sermon, how scared I was as I stood before that congregation and preached to them. None of that matches when you're a young green preacher and somebody comes in and threatens you with money. I was pastor of the Sand Flat Baptist Church. When I got there, they were running 62 in Sunday school. I was their first experiment with a full-time pastor. They had part-time pastors, although they had a parsonage. The last pastor's wife had burned it to the ground. Mine almost did. And she left the roast cooking. Yeah, hers was on purpose. Yeah, it's a long story. That's another story altogether. The building was built in 1898. The baptistry was put in that year. So this baptistry was put in the 19th century. It was a welded metal tub with a heater on it that I thought was going to blow up every time they lit it to heat the water. I mean, I thought that heater was just going to blow up right then and there, take that wooden building to, Kingdom Come and back. And that wouldn't have been such a loss, but it had some beautiful stuff in it. And now the church was growing. We were baptizing people every other Sunday. We were bouncing, before I left the church to go to another one, we were bouncing off the doors of 140 in Sunday school. It was kind of a happening place to be around. We bought a house next door to expand our youth department into, and it was just going like crazy. But then Santa Fe Railroad, you see, most of my men worked for the Santa Fe Railroad. I had boilermakers and electricians and all kinds of things, because there's a big repair shop right there. And Santa Fe closed that repair shop. Well, that'll make a dent in your budget, baby. I'm here to tell you. So we were struggling. This was my second year there, and we were struggling financially. We were having a problem. And one Sunday night, this young lady who was a single woman, not single, but she's not a mother, but she worked in our youth department with her and her husband. And I thought they were okay, but I've been hearing rumors that they were causing a little trouble, but I wasn't sure what to do. And she comes in and sits down in my office and says, I want to talk to you before church tonight. Okay. What's on your mind? And she began to accuse our minister of music and youth. We had a dual guy who did music and he did youth, and he's now a pastor doing great. Accused him of all kinds of things. He was doing this and he wasn't doing that, and he's not doing this, and there was a list. She didn't come with one or two complaints, she came with a list. Now I knew our minister of music and youth, and I knew his character, I knew his ethics, and I knew that half of that stuff he would never even think of, let alone do. And the other half he might think about it, but he wouldn't do it. I knew that. I didn't really have to check. I really pretty much knew that was the case. What it mattered was she wanted her way and she wasn't getting it. And here's where she came, and I knew her and her husband gave well to the church. She earned a lot of money. She was an engineer or something. And she looked at me and said, if you don't handle him, I'll quit giving our money and we'll go somewhere else. She shook her finger at me like that, and I think I'd have been all right if she hadn't shook her finger at me. I don't respond real well to threats. And I took a deep breath, and all I remember, the only prayer I remember saying was, Lord, give me the right words to say. I said those in my head. And I took a deep breath, and out of my mouth came, I don't believe half of what you told me. And if you're going to leave, please don't let the doorknob hit your butt on the way out. That's the scariest I have ever been. Because that night after church, I had to get my deacons together and tell them. I wanted them the first one. I wanted to hear it from me. And I told them, and you know what? Half of them were going, oh, thank God. I'm so glad we had to deal with that and we didn't have to. And the other half shield. I mean, I wanted something I could pull up and they could hit it and nothing would go wrong, and I just needed that, but it didn't come. And it's obvious that Captain America trusts his shield, but sometimes we wonder, can God be trusted? I mean, it gets pretty nitty-gritty out there sometimes. You remember that question was probably asked by 2.5 million Israelis as they stood between Pharaoh's army and the deep Red Sea. And then the waters parted, and they got across the sea on dry land. It was asked by a boy named David when he went up against the biggest guy you've ever seen in your life with a slingshot and a few stones. It was asked by one prophet after another who, trembling sometimes, stood before the people of Israel and told them, if you guys don't straighten up and quit doing this and going after every idol on the planet, God is going to get you. And it would happen. It was asked by Jesus of Lazarus' sister Martha when he came to the funeral. And he said different words, but basically you boil all those words down as, well, Martha, do you trust God? Do you trust Him right now? I mean, I know your brother's dead. And you didn't tell her, I know he's dead, and I knew he was going to die before he died, and I waited until he died to get here. He could have told her that, but he didn't. He said, but basically, do you trust God? It is asked by believers every day, somewhere in the 1040 window, which is, you just have to look, it's 10 degrees north latitude, 40 degrees north, I don't know, whatever it is. It's the 1040 window. It's that strip of land across the world where most of the terrorism and beheadings take place. You see all those missionaries' names in your bulletin today that you're praying for? You see a lot of initials, ES and DJ and some of those other names. Those are people serving in those parts of the world, and we can't tell you their name, nor where they're serving, to protect them. Some of our missionaries are under those missiles falling in Syria that our country is lobbing over there. They're there and they're not leaving. And they ask the question as they stand there, can we trust God? On September the 11th, 2001, most of us know what happened that day. Some of us know what happened on United Flight 93. Todd Beamer was a passenger, and he called his wife and violated about 1,500 FAA rules and regulations to do that, but he called her on his cell phone and told her what was happening and told her that he loved her and that they were going to him and a few other guys were going to try to take the terrorists out and get control of the plane back. And he said, I love you, and he hung up. We have no idea what happened. All the intelligence analysis tells us that that plane was headed for the center of Washington, D.C. and probably the White House, which President Bush refused to leave. All we know is on September the 11th, 2001, United Flight 93 plowed over a field in Pennsylvania. And that was the date of Todd Beamer's entrance into the kingdom of heaven. Him and every other believer on that flight. Now, I find it interesting that his wife was later interviewed. Well, I don't know if I could have done this or not, but here's what she said. I have prayed about this a lot, and it is often as if God says to me, listen, I knew on September 10th that he was going to die, and I could have stopped it. But I have a plan for a greater good than you can ever imagine, and you just have to trust me. She said, I understand God's plan, and quite frankly, I don't like it very much. But I trust Him. And I know He'll be true to His promise in Romans 8:28. If you don't know what that says, it says that we know that all things God works for the good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. Now, how it all works out for the good, that's sometimes hard to see. I don't know how things are going in your life the last couple of weeks, but I got to tell you in mine, I'm with Lisa Beamer. I don't much like God's plan much. I haven't liked it much the last couple of weeks. But I trust Him, even when I'm not a fan of His plan. There are many authors of the book of Psalms King David is one. He wrote a lot. Solomon wrote a few. Some are by music directors. You can see who they're in there. It's by the music director. And others wrote them. Some we don't know where they came from. God just gave them to somebody and they got worked in and they've been there for 3,000 years. But this one we're going to read today, Psalm 91, and it's if you're using a Pew Bible, it's page 424 in the black Bible in front of you if you need to use that one. This one was written by Moses. Now we don't know whether Moses dictated it or he actually wrote it, but it's attributed to him. And he is a guy that perhaps more than any other understood what it was to trust God through difficult times when the evil world seems to get the upper hand. I mean, can you imagine being Moses? Every single day, somebody had it right. Moses, we don't like manna. We're tired of manna. Saw a cartoon this last week where the waiter, had a thin pencil French mustaches, and he comes up, and there's two guys sitting at a table that's obviously in the desert, and he says, for the appetizer, we have patates of manna. And then for the main course event, we have sauteed manna. And then for dessert, we have manna with something. He put something on top of manna. Something manna on top of the manna. That's what we have to eat today. And these guys are looking at each other like, really? Okay. Every time he turned around, somebody was griping about something. And yet Moses writes this psalm. We find it in Psalm 91, verses 1 through 4. I invite you to stand with me in honor of the Word of God as we read the text. Now, I warned you last Sunday. My sweet wife had purchased for me a new Bible because my old one that I've been preaching out of for a long time, that was given to me by a gentleman that was tired of me doing this. And he bought a Bible that's really big enough for me to read without my glasses. She bought me one too, but this is the Holman Christian Standard Bible, not the NIV, so it'll read a little different, but I'll always kind of tell you what the NIV means and so forth and so on. But this is what I'm reading from today, beginning in verse 1. The one who lives under the protection of the Most High dwells in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. He himself will deliver you from the hunter's net. NIV says fowler's snare. From the destructive plague, he will cover you with his feathers. You will take refuge under his wings. His faithfulness will be a protective shield. You may be seated. The first thing I want you to see today, I just want to see three quick things today, because I'm going to bring you back tonight, and my point tonight, my message tonight has 6 points, so I'm just going to do 3 today. Trent's going over 6. Man, didn't they teach you anything in preacher school? Number 1, God himself, Yahweh, the great I Am, is our shelter and refuge. You know, some things are supposed to be our protection, aren't they? The law is supposed to protect us, isn't it? It's supposed to stand there. But you know, I saw in the Times last week where a woman was arrested for having a dirty spoon on her front seat when she was stopped for a traffic stop. Put in jail. She didn't have the money for bail, and she sat there for 2 or 3 days, a young single mother. And she almost pled guilty to a lesser crime, and she was charged with because the officer thought the residue on the spoon might be methamphetamines. And she almost pled guilty to a lesser charge just to get out of jail when the test results came back and said it was spaghetti sauce, just like she told. She had no priors, no arrests, nothing but traffic stops on her record. I'm mostly on the side of police officers most of the time, but that was like the boneheadedest thing I've ever heard of. Now, unless there's something we don't know. It's entirely possible. But it doesn't seem like to me that the law was being very protective at just that moment. Our Constitution is supposed to protect us. Now, I don't know what they teach you in school. Well, actually, I do know what they teach you in school today. They're teaching you in school today that the United States Constitution is the document that gives the right to the government to do what it does. You know what? That's an absolute lie. The Constitution is written to limit the power of government and give and to delegate those powers, other powers, and rights to the people. But others are taking our Constitution and using it for all kinds of things, and it doesn't seem like much protection today. And we could go on. I mean, I could go on and on. We don't have time to do that. But there are things that are supposed to protect us, and they do not. Here in Psalm 91, verses 1 through 2, we are told that God is our protection in two very important ways. First of all, it says He is our shelter. Literally, the word means roof over your head. Hard top. If you're in Oklahoma, you want a garage, because if you don't have a garage, your car one day is going to look like somebody took a ball bean hammer after it. If it sits outside very long, it's going to look like somebody just took a rounded hammer and just beat it all over the place. You want at least a carport. You want something to stick it under. The Holman Christian Bible translates it our protection. The King James, I like its translation better. He is our secret place. He's not only a roof over our head, He's the one that hides us in His secret place when the bad guy is coming after us. He's also told He is our shadow or our shade. You know how you can tell you're from Texas? When you go looking for a parking place in June, you don't look for one that's closest to the door at Walmart. You look for anyone that's got shade. So your car won't cook when it's 104 degrees in the shade. Shade is protection. We have protection under the shadow of God. Now, how God provides this shelter and shade may not always be immediately prevalent, and it may not always be where you can see it. And it may seem like, hey, God, where's the roof? Everybody is raining down on top of me, and where is the protection? You may not always be able to see it. You may not always know where it's coming from, but it's there whether you see it or not. The interesting thing is, God is our protection, but you know, if He throws His protection up here, you got to actually go here. You can't be over here doing something else, saying, God, I like your protection. God said, no, it's right over here. All you got to do is come over and get under. He said, well, I don't want to be over there. I want to be over here. No, that's not how it works. He is our protection and our shield. When a poll is taken of the most beloved Psalms in the entire book, there is a tie for number one. You know what it is? Psalm 23 and Psalm 91. Those are the ties for the two most loved Psalms in all the surveys I could find. And instantly enough, it says here, don't miss this promise. This psalm has been used by people for refuge for 3,000 years. Don't miss it. He says to us, as we dwell in the shadow of the Almighty, we will say to God, Yahweh, literally Yahweh, the one who the great I am, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. God does not promise to build you a refuge. I maybe misled you a moment ago. He doesn't promise to build us a refuge. He tells us He is our refuge. You know, you ever in your prayer time sit down and you're praying and you're giving God your opinion? God, I don't like this, or God, I want this, or God, I don't like... You know, I got to tell you, God loves you, and He'll put up with that, but He's not really interested in your opinion. I mean, I just hate to disillusion you, but He's not really interested in your opinion of how things ought to be. He's been working at how things ought to be for a lot longer, I mean, just for real, face it, a lot longer than you have. And sometimes we think He owes us an explanation for how things work out. You promised to be my protection. Doesn't seem like it. God says, you have no idea what I prevented. You have no idea what I did. You say, well, my loved one died. You have no idea what I saved them from that was coming. You have no idea the pain that there could have been. You have no idea what could... Well, I wanted to really marry him. I really wanted to marry him. You have no idea what I just saved you from. We tell God all this stuff, and God says, oh, you know, I guess He's used to it by now, and He just says, okay, I love you anyway, you tell me it's okay, and I'm going to do what I plan to do to start with. In Revelation 21, as the new city of Jerusalem is described, John and an angel take a measuring rod out to measure the city. And they measured the walls of the city, and they measured 144 cubits. Now, if you look at 5 different commentaries, you will find 5 different definitions of how long a cubit is. I mean, most people tell you it's supposed to be from here to here, but you ever hear the Bill Cosby version of Noah? God tells him, build it by so many cubits, and Noah says, God wants a cubit. And God says, I don't know, I used to know what a cubit was. Well, that's kind of how it is today. We're not really sure how wide a cubit was, but the average width was, if you take 144 cubits, that means the wall of the new city of Jerusalem, which is heaven, is 216 feet thick. That's a big wall. And if you read on the whole description, you get the general idea that the wall's not really there. It is God Himself who are the walls of the city. And He is our refuge and our protection. Not our nation, not our government, not our constitution, not our denomination, not our doctrine, our creeds, our pastor, the preacher, the pope, or anybody else. All of those things may be helpers. They are not our protection. And if we trust Him, really trust Him, we can say the same thing Edward Mote said in 1834 when he said, my hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. The second thing that Moses, the great leader of God's people, tells us is that not only is God our refuge, He is the one who will save us. The word for save in Hebrew is ancient. In fact, Yahweh can be translated also, not only the great I am, it can also mean the one who saves. And the great Old Testament is a very ancient Hebrew word, and it's Yasha, and it means He who saves. And that's the word that is used here. We are saved from the fowler's snare, from the hunter's trap. We are kept out of the snare by God's great care. We get caught in it even by our own stupidity. You never did anything stupid, did you? No. I thought I was the only one that done that. You do something your own, you do it and you look back and you say, oh God, that was so dumb. Help me. And He's the one that gets you out of that trap. And sometimes we don't like the way He gets us out, do we? But He still gets us out just the same. Sometimes this promise is fulfilled ultimately in heaven. God never promises us that His protection is going to be like the end of a Disney version of a fairy tale, where the charming prince is going to ride off into the sunset carrying the princess on his big white charger, after he's found her with the glass slipper and all that kind of stuff. Life just doesn't work that way. Recently there was a major Jewish holiday. It probably slipped right by you. You probably missed it. I almost did. Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. Nancy reminded me that the Day of Atonement, the high priest offers first a sacrifice for he and his family. Then, only then, can he offer sacrifices on behalf of the people. And so then he takes another sacrifice and he makes that, and then he alone goes into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, and he spreads the blood on the mercy seat and prays for the sins of the people. Every year, for thousands of years, this happened. But since 70 AD, 1,944 years, there has been no day of atonement for the people of God. Now you talk to one rabbi after the other, and they'll rationalize it all over the place. They'll rationalize it one way, they'll rationalize it another way, but no matter how much they rationalize it, no blood has been shed, and no blood has been spread on the mercy seat, and thus no Day of Atonement. There's a reason for that. Because Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. God began by ripping the veil in between the places from top to bottom, and then 70 AD, a few years later, the Roman army put that temple into rubble. God's promise to us is that He is our protection. He is our salvation. He is the one who saves. His promise to protect us and to save us is like a mother hen covering her chicks. Several years ago, there was a major fire that swept through Yellowstone National Park. We've been there when there had been a fire not long before, and it really looks different. If you go there when there hadn't been a fire, and you go after one that's there, it's really different. All the undergrowth is burned out, the new growth is coming up, and it's really something else. But in this particular fire, it had swept through and got particularly hot. I mean, just incredibly hot. And as the firefighters came through, some of these guys from the city, some of them from the country, this guy came through after it was over. He was going through making sure hot spots were put out, and he found a mother hen dead, a wild hen dead. And he reached to move her, and she was so crisp that she tumbled into ashes. But underneath, in a small hole, were 4 baby chicks alive. She knew instinctively that she'd never get them out by air. Not all of them. So to protect them, she got them in the lowest place she could find them, and she covered them with her wings and protected them. That's what God promises to do for us. He took the burnt. He took the death. He took the cross for us. He doesn't explain how it's all going to work out, or what the protection will entail, or he didn't even explain at first that He was going to sacrifice His Son. He just said, someone's coming and they're going to take care of this for you. But He who would give His own Son will surely sacrifice other things for us to protect us. Finally, God promises to be our shield and rampart. If you have the NIV, I think it says shield and rampart. Or if you have the King James, it says bulwark. And here's where Captain America comes back into play. The shield in its day was cutting-edge technology. The shield, the first word for shield that's there, is the size of a man. I mean, it goes from the ground to here. And it is so large that it could not be carried by the fighter himself. It was carried by a shield bearer. In fact, if you read the story of Goliath, you will see that Goliath had his own shield and his own shield bearer. They would hide behind the shield as the arrows came and the other things they would pour over them and throw at them. And until they got through throwing at them and went to fighting, they hid behind that shield. God says, I am that protection for you. The Holman Bible just kind of puts both words together, rampart and shield, and puts them together and says our protection. That's really what it means. In the second promise, He comes to a word used nowhere else in the entire Old Testament. And that's always dangerous. It's always difficult to know how to translate a word when it's only used one time. We really don't. We find it used in a couple of places outside of the Bible, and that's the only way we have comparison. And so you see it translated rampart, which would mean the top of the fortress. You see it translated bulwark, which means just any big shield. But some Hebrew scholars, as they've done more research, think it means the buckler. Now, let me tell you what that means. That would have been a shield about the size of the one Captain America would carry. And it would buckle on your arm and buckle around your hand, and it wouldn't come off. I mean, you couldn't get rid of it. It would stay there. And you held it on your weak side and your sword in your right side, and you went into battle. God is not only the shield that protects us from the arrows, He is the buckler that goes with us into the battle. You and I need to understand the Captain America shield is a lot like God. You know, when He throws that shield, it always comes back. Nothing can damage it. Nothing can move it. Nothing can get rid of it. God says, I'm never going anywhere. I'm never going to leave you. I'll always be there, and I will always protect you. What these promises boil down to is whether or not the Lord is true to His word and the promise keeper. If He isn't, then the atheist and the naysayers are right, and we are all just whistling in the wind. But if God is faithful to His word, and He is, then And true to His promises, you and I can be anchored to the Lord and never, never worry about that. The world is an evil place. It really is. But we can say with King David, I will fear no evil, for you are God, and you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. It was Christmas Eve, 1875, and Ira Sankey was traveling on a riverboat up the Delaware River and recognized by some passengers. If you don't know who Ira Sankey was, he was the music leader. He was a celebrity of the 19th century. He was the music leader for D.L. Moody. And D.L. Moody had been conducting revivals and crusades in that area, and Ira Sankey's name and his face had been all over the newspapers, and people recognized him. It's Christmas Eve, and they said, Mr. Sankey, sing some of the hymns you have written. And he said, no, I don't want to sing my own stuff. I want to sing a song, another song. And so he began to lift his voice, and he sang, Savior, like a shepherd leads. When he finished, a man came up to him and said, Mr. Sankey, did you ever serve in the Union Army during the Great War? Sankey said, I did. I began serving in the spring of 1860. He says, were you on picket duty for your unit on a bright moonlit night in 1862? Now, you need to understand when somebody does that to you, you begin to kind of go, He said, yeah, I was. He said, well, I was there that night, only I was wearing a gray uniform, and I was under a cover of darkness. And I saw you standing out there, and I said to myself, that's a Union Army soldier that's going to die tonight. Because I can shoot the wings off a gnat at 200 yards, and I'm going to take this guy out. But just as I raised my gun, just as I was beginning to squeeze the trigger, you began to sing that song. And I said to myself, well, I'll let him sing. When he finishes, it's not going to make any difference. He's still going to die tonight. I'll let him finish his song and then I'll pull the trigger. And you kept singing. And I remembered my mother singing that song to me when I was a boy. We are thine, do thou befriend us, be the guardian of our way. And my arms of their own accord dropped to my side, and I laid my life down and wept. The Lord, who is able to save that man from certain death, he said, must surely be great and mighty. It all comes down to if you can trust the Lord or not. You can. The real question is, will you? I invite you today to join me in trusting God together, stepping out in faith and taking hold of what He has for us as we walk out here together today.